It is the first Monday of October, and what better way to start it off than with a Monster Monday? Following on from a build for Blade, the marvelous slayer of sanguine suckers, this week features a vicious vampire, excellently illustrated by Seth Monster. With plenty of casters and manipulators already in the ranks, I decided to put together a more combat-focused option in the form of the Bloodripper. My whole idea is to make monsters for the hunters and slayers that I build on Fridays on the following Mondays, and for Blade I obviously had to build a vampire. My original concept for it was a grotesque giant that had a hollow in its body that it could use to entrap its victims. It would then use those imprisoned creatures as a living blood bag, and I was writing up some concepts for it when somebody mentioned the idea sounded really similar to the Blood Brother from Starfinder. And, well, damn it. Alright, so I had to go back to the drawing board and pivot from that concept to something entirely new. I landed on the idea of a vampire that could make a greater use of blood than usual, able to wield it as a weapon against the very people that it steals it from. This fit with my idea of making a more combat-capable vampire, which does feel a little lacking from their lineup. For its actual design, I looked towards building it as a different level than the other pre-existing vampires, settling on level 7 so that it sat between the Vampire Count and Vampire Mastermind, and could serve as bodyguards or enforcers for either of them. I went for a medium creature since these don't really fit my giant grotesque vampire concept, and then it uses the classic traits of its kin of undead, unholy, and vampire. I know that vampires are often depicted with inhuman strength, but I like the idea of the Bloodripper being a more nimble sort of combatant. As such, it uses a high dexterity as its primary combat score, though I do envision it still being decently strong, which is why it also has a moderate strength. It makes further use of a moderate charisma, because I intend for the Bloodripper to use spells alongside its martial combat, being a Gish sort of monster. Its remaining ability scores are low, with its wisdom being a little standout and sitting in between low and moderate, and because of this I decided to use a moderate perception score, and included the dark vision ability as is standard among vampires. Along with that, the Bloodripper gains a solid array of skills, since it is an intelligent creature for once. Its most notable skills are acrobatics and intimidation, which both use a high value. The former is based on its dexterity, whereas the latter lets it terrorize its victims, something I'm sure takes some sadistic satisfaction in doing. It follows that with a moderate athletics and stealth, which should facilitate its combat style, but isn't a major focus for it, whereas its low society and thievery simply round out its skills and give it some more story and flavor-based options for you or your GM to play around with. Based on the high dexterity that I designed the Bloodripper with, I decided to assign it a high armor class. It keeps to light armor and largely relies on its innate agility to evade incoming blows, while its hit points are in the low range. Honestly, they're even below low, because vampires come with a ton of defenses. Aside from the traditional immunities simply from being undead, vampires specifically have both a minor level of fast healing and physical resistance that is common among all true vampires. Now, to be fair, vampires do also have some innate and unique vulnerabilities, the classics such as compulsions, revulsions, stakes, and sunlight. So I did keep its saving throws a bit more standard by starting out with a high reflex save, allowing it to nimbly evade effects thrown at it, and then right below that, it has a moderate will save, leading into the concept of the Bloodripper being a more stable and mentally resilient sort of creature, a stoic enforcer for the likes of the more petulant vampire counts. This does leave it with a low fortitude save, its undead state having left it a little bit more feeble than you might otherwise expect it to be. Now, as for its offenses, the Bloodripper normally only has a Claw Strike, which only uses a moderate attack roll and has the Agile and Finesse traits. Damage-wise, it also deals a moderate amount of damage, but it does come with the Grab ability, which is for the sake of typical vampire things, like holding down foes to drink their blood. The Bloodripper does have a unique strike that I decided to denote here, though we are going to have a big chat about it when it comes to talking about abilities. At its core, the Bloodblade is a surprisingly simple weapon that features the Finesse trait, a high attack bonus, and a high amount of damage. This is intended to be its primary means of attack, and while I haven't mentioned it yet, I was planning on building the Bloodripper as a magical striker, which is perhaps most pronounced here in the design of this blade. Though, I guess to be a magical striker, you do actually need some magic, so let's look at that real quick. I used a high DC, and the main bread and butter of the Bloodripper is going to be Vampiric Feast. It's a little front door, but the temporary hit points it provides will be extremely useful for our overall concept. I filled his lower slots with an array of necromancy type spells with a slight focus on persistent bleed damage, as we see with Bone Spray and Flens. However, I could not bring myself to pass up on the inclusion of Call the Blood. This is actually outside the range of what a magical striker of this level should have, but it fits the Bloodripper too well with it providing temporary hit points or the Quicken condition. I did also include the Life Drain focus spell, as I found other creatures that had focus spells without any other sorcerer parts to them, and this really fits well with its overall kit. Before we get into the bigger bulk of that kit, we've got to talk vampires. True vamps, which I do intend for the Bloodripper to be, have a nutty array of abilities that are all featured here. I'm not going to do a deep dive on any of them since I didn't design any of them, but I want to give them a bit of a shout out and mention any numbers going on. Taking it from the top, vampires have Children of the Night, letting them influence certain creatures. Mist Escape gives the vamp a chance to get out of there after being reduced to 0 HP, whereas Change Shape lets it turn into a giant bat with a high attack bonus bite that deals moderate damage. Its Dominate uses a moderate DC for its level. I went for 10 HP from its Drink Blood per the level 6 vampire count, and there's of course the more bog standard Turn to Mist. With all those covered, let's start seeing what separates this sanguine soldier from other such suckers. The core of all that, in my own opinion, really comes in the form of Form Bloodblade. To use this, the Bloodripper needs to have first gathered blood, represented by temp HP, from his victims. Once it has, it can sacrifice a portion of this temp H pizzle to create the Blood Blade, and can even modify it with extra traits. The Bloodripper can continue to curate its blade, shaping it into a weapon appropriate to its situation or prey. And I selected a fun little lineup of these traits that it could use. While a Bloodripper could potentially add all the traits at once in one go, it also has the option of adding them bit by bit through the expenditure of that additional temp HP and actions. To that end, in addition to the Bloodripper's draining spells that we've already gone over, it has Open Vein, which is actually inspired by the recently introduced Sanguimancer archetype and its Exsanguinate feat. This lets it add a little bit to its pool of temp HP following a strike, which it should be able to immediately use to further develop said blade. Now, at this point, something that you may be thinking is, what if the PCs nuke all that fancy smanchy temp HP before it gets to use it? And to that end, the Bloodripper has the Cling to Life passive ability. This allows it to stack up sources of temporary health Kuna Patatas up to 35, which when added to its base hit points is about a moderate pool of HP. On top of that, the Bloodripper can choose to take damage to its actual HP to preserve that blood it has gathered. The one exception to this is if the Bloodripper is targeted by vitality damage, which disrupts its necromantic magic and briefly suppresses its entire effect. I do want to point out, this is an excellent piece of information to give players when they succeed on a recall knowledge check and don't know what to ask for. There is one final ability to the Bloodripper, and it's a fairly simple one. Predator's Advantage is pulled from the Deinonychus of all creatures, and it just feels like an excellent fit for a martially inclined vampire. It might honestly be a little too obvious, especially when the Bloodripper can add the tearing trait to its weapon, but I like to think it's so obvious because it's so perfect. We're about overdrawn at the blood bank, so let's start stitching things up. Steeped in skill and sorcery, this sinister soldier sends slayers to a sudden cessation with succinct swipes and slashes from a sanguine sword, shaped from their succor. As I said earlier, I wanted to build the Bloodripper so that it could hang with the Vampire Count or Mastermind, likely serving as a bodyguard for the former, or enforcers for the latter. However, they could also certainly operate on their own, and I really love the idea of having a Bloodripper who specifically seeks out the fighter, or other similar marshals from a party, to claim their blood, and a belief that doing so will allow it to also claim their skills. We've got another Hunter of Horrors coming up later this week, so be sure to look forward to that. Beyond that, let me know what you think of this creature and what other sorts of monsters you'd like to see in a comment. If you like what you see here and want more, be sure to leave a like and then subscribe to the channel. You can also check out the blog, which is linked below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.